Here's a 2010 F-150 Platinum Edition. Maybe you were put off by the $50,000 price when it was brand new. A customer here, he bought it for $16,000. That was 1 year ago. It's still running fine. He admitted to me that he's only used the four-wheel drive once on it, but I mean, if he needs to. One big advantage of four-wheel drive when you're talking about used vehicles. Sure, the new ones cost a lot more four-wheel drive. The resale value of the used four-wheel drives is much higher. So even though you'll pay a little bit more, he still saved a ton. 16 versus $50,000. If he gets tired of it and he wants to sell it on, this thing will be so easy to sell, especially here in Tennessee. Guys in the Army are just dying to get their hands on a four-wheel drive version. So even if you don't want a four-wheel drive, it can be your advantage if you're planning on having it a while and then sell it on. You can get the two-wheel drive versions a lot cheaper, but you're going to get a lot less for them when you sell it on. And they do come in handy if you live where it snows or you go hunting, you go out in the mud, you're not going to get stuck. Now, he's only spent about $2,000 in repairs since he bought it. The main one was the brakes kept wearing out. Now, he tried drilled and slotted rotors, and then he said they wear out even faster. That's why I advise people, don't do it, especially on a truck. That is a racing design. It's for multiple stopping and starting, racing around the track, hitting the brakes, letting go of the brakes at high speeds, so the brakes don't overheat. Now, you're generally not driving a truck like that. You hit the brakes once to stop it, and you're stopped. So they actually stop better without drilled and slotted because there's a bigger surface area. It's for continuous application and then acceleration. So don't waste your money on that on just about any vehicle unless you're racing it. And as strange as it sounds, from my experience, the best brake pads you can get for these things are Akebono, a Japanese company. Yeah, but they make ceramic pads. They cost a little bit more, but they're excellent pads. They can take the heat dissipation because they're ceramic. They don't eat up the rotors as bad, and they can last a really long time. So surprisingly enough, if you put Japanese pads on your Ford truck, you'll find they'll probably last longer, and the rotors will last longer too. And as we look under the hood, sure, it's dirty, but who cares? He had to change the VVT sensors on the engine, which is no big deal. He did it himself, bought them at Ford, and then it ran fine again. That's a typical problem with these engines, and hey, you can easily do it yourself. It's a simple job. Just watch my video on changing variable valve timing solenoids. They just bolt in and out, and the advantage of this particular design is, since it's older, you don't have to reprogram anything. On some of the new ones, you're going to have to reprogram it, and then you got to pay a guy like me. But on these older ones, you just pop them in, drive, and the computer figures it out itself. Another reason maybe buying a little bit older vehicle is a good thing. And here's a tip. This is a 2010 Triton 5.43V. The earlier ones had problems with the spark plugs breaking off, and Ford had to redesign them. So if you're looking at one older than 2010, you want to have the spark plugs checked. By now, most guys have swapped them out to Ford's new design. But let's say you got a low mileage one. Maybe an elderly couple owned it, and it's still got the original spark plugs. In that case, you want to be very careful, and you want to remove them all. Go to Ford and buy the new redesigned plugs and put them in. It was a design flaw. Ford knows it. If you happen to get an old one that's still got the original plugs, you want to do that now rather than later, because if you do have a problem and they blow out, it can ruin the threads. You might have to put new cylinder heads in. In the case of if they're in there and you can get them out with a long extension bar and a socket, do it now. Buy one that's 2010 or newer. They don't have that problem. Now, the other thing that went out was the alternator. Typical Ford alternator. It lasted about 100,000 miles. You expect that in a Ford. He does his own stuff. So he went to AutoZone. It was about $100 and came with a lifetime warranty. He'll never have to buy another one. And there's AutoZones everywhere. You're not paying me to say this, that's just the truth, you know? I got stuff in them, and if you break down in California, you just give them your phone number, and then they'll look it up, and you get another alternator free. So, hey, worry-free there. Now, there is an error on the oil cap. You can see it says 5W20. Even Ford admits you 5W30 because it lubricates better. Now, in some of the modern cars, that's sacrilegious. You can't, because they need a super lightweight oil to lubricate everything. but this is a classic V8. You really want to use a 5W30 in this. Now, you might think this owner's a bit of a fanatic. He bought it used, and he did notice when he took the valve covers off, there was some varnish in it, meaning that the previous owner didn't change the oil enough. So what does he do? He changes the oil a lot. He changes the oil every 2,000 or 3,000 miles. He has a very good philosophy on this. He knows the guy abused it, didn't change the oil enough because of the varnish. You may not realize it, but the bottom of your engine, where the pistons bolt with a connecting rod to the crankshaft, there's bearings. They're thin metal, and that's what it rides on. If you have an abused vehicle, those bearings could be worn a little. And it's insidious, because you won't hear anything until it's too late and the rods start knocking. Then you have to rebuild the engine. If you change the oil a lot, if there was any wear, it's going to really make wear less. And you do have to consider that the rod bearings are where? On the bottom of the engine. Okay, where does the most gunk go? The bottom of the engine. So it only makes sense. Oil is cheap, engines are expensive. And in doing so, this truck is treating him well. It runs like a clock, shouldn't have any engine problems. And I mean, this guy's pretty smart with his trucks. His previous one was a plain two-wheel drive Ford that he bought for $8,000, got hit by deer, and made a few thousand on that by getting it fixed at a Maaco and pocketing the difference, and then selling it for the same price that he paid for it, $8,000. Just think, the original owner of this thing lost $34,000 when he sold it. He bought a used Ford, and not only did he break even on buying it and selling it, but he made thousands when it got hit by a deer by getting it fixed cheaper. He didn't care. It still looked okay, obviously, because he sold it for $8,000, but he actually made money on the deal, where the guy who bought this lost $36,000. Big reason why you might think about a used truck next time. The other advantage of used this, got the chrome tow hooks, the interior's got the immaculate leather. Now it is 11 years old, so you know the driver's seat's gonna have holes in it. That's just Ford leather, but got tons of space inside, true room for 3 people in the back, heat and air conditioning too. For a lot less money, you get all this luxury. You save a ton over even a stripped down new one, which doesn't have anything that you want. There's nothing wrong with getting a used F-150 truck. They still have a lot of stuff you can do yourself, like this owner has. And even if you don't find a mechanic like me, there's so many guys that know how to work on Fords. It's not like you're taking it to a Maserati dealer. It's going to be a $4,000 tune-up, you know? They're common vehicles people know how to work on, and parts are dirt cheap. Look at that $100 alternator. Try that with any modern car. It's going to be a lot more than that. Now you might say, this big old thing, what, a gas hog? Well, it gets 22 miles a gallon on the highway. You can't argue with a huge vehicle like this. Hey, check it out. A sunroof and a pickup truck. What's the world coming to? And if you really want the height of redneck luxury, an electric window to get into the bed, so you can throw things in the bed while you're going down the road and don't have to slow down. Now here's some real world advice on flex fuel. His gas mileage on his normal commuting went from 20 miles a gallon to 12 when he tried out flex fuel. So he doesn't use it anymore. Now, of course, it ran perfectly fine. The thing is, ethanol burns cleaner. But there's a big problem with ethanol, is that it has less British thermal units, BTUs, than gasoline. About 20% less. But he got a lot worse than 20% worse gas mileage, because it gets really complicated. Now, the speeding freaks love it because you get more horsepower. It just puts out more zing the way that it burns faster and cleaner. But he didn't feel like going from 20 to 12 miles a gallon average gas mileage, so that was the end of that. The fuel's only a little bit cheaper. It does burn cleaner, yes. If you're gonna get that worse gas mileage, it doesn't really make any sense. Except to the farmers who are growing the corn, so sorry there, farmers, but I'm not a fan of E85 either. So if you're looking for a good used truck, especially a 4x4, hey, if you can find an F-150 like this, get a good used one, you can really save a lot of money and still have a nice looking truck. Styles haven't changed all that much. They're pickup trucks. They got boxes in the back, you know? They can do all they want on the front ends. They're still pickup trucks. Why spend 60 to 80 grand today on a new one? Let somebody else take all that loss and get it when there's a lot of life left in it. 2021 F-150 that the guy bought brand new. You gotta say, it's a beautiful looking truck. It's fully loaded. It's an FX4 off-road, so it's 4-wheel drive. He put the nice top on it. It's a 5x4 foot bed. When you have these seats in the back, that of course takes up space. So you can't have as big of a bed with the frames that they design it for. But of course, being an F-150, it's got a real frame. There's where it bolts on. A serious truck with a serious frame. This is not unibody construction. Now, interestingly, this is a hybrid. You can tell that by the orange wires here. And it really makes a difference in this vehicle. Of course, I'm old school. I like the V8s, but of course, you're going to get worse gas mileage. And with this hybrid system, this has got plenty enough power, but still gets good, real gas mileage. Now, I'm not talking about the fantasy that you see on the sticker that's done on a dyno. Only a small portion of that stuff is actually ever tested. In Michigan, most of it, they just go by the manufacturer's information they give you. But in the real world, driving us down the road, and he's pulling an 8,000-pound trailer, he's getting 21 miles a gallon. And that's something. You gotta understand, when you're pulling stuff, all those figures go out the window. Read the article that was a few months ago about the Canadian guy with a Tesla, and he was pulling just his bass boat. And he went 90 miles, and he couldn't make it back because it had gone through more than 60% of the charge just going 90 miles because he was pulling something. Realize, that's one of the reasons I make these videos. Don't listen to the fantasy advertising crap. Listen to real people who actually own these things and see how they work in the real world when they're pulling stuff, when they're hauling stuff, not some made-up figure. And 21 is pretty good for a gasoline pickup truck, towing that kind of weight. But on his commute, when he's driving on a highway to work, he's gotten as high as 36 miles a gallon. And that's insane on a truck that's as big as this, that's four-wheel drive, that has all this horsepower, because you got the gasoline engine, but you also got the electric traction motor going. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice the floor's a little bit higher. Well, that's because the electric battery pack is under here, and it's liquid cooled. This one here is the cooling for the electric battery. Being liquid cooled, I have yet to see any of these things ever catch on fire in the batteries like a lot of those electric cars do. So basically with this system, you can get the best of both worlds. You're just tootling around on a highway. If you can get 36 miles a gallon in a pickup truck, that's really something. But if you got a tow and he's towing 8,000 pounds, it can do it easily, but it still gets 21 miles a gallon. And for those of you who don't know pickup trucks, try towing 8,000 pounds with any normal pickup truck. They'll start getting into the single digits gas mileage, not 21. Now, technologically speaking, the way that's made possible is with that wild 10-speed automatic transmission that Ford has. Now, granted, the early ones did have problems, and that's the only gripe that he says he's really got with this truck is that it often skips second gear. Now, this one has a 7.2 kilowatt inverter on it. And of course, if he wants to use it for construction, hey, no problem. You got a lot of power. You leave that engine running, as long as you got gas in the tank, the sucker's gonna be able to power a lot of stuff. That's a big deal for a lot of people. That's why I don't comprehend all this crap about pure electric vehicles. For a lot of people, these hybrid ones make a lot more sense because you got the best of both worlds. You can get all the electricity when you need it, but you got a tank of gasoline that you're not going to run out of no matter where you are, and it's not going to leave you stranded when the electricity runs out as long as you watch your gas gauge. And there's still an awful lot of gas pumps out there compared to the puny amount of electric chargers there are in this country today. Now, since it's four-wheel drive, you're not going to get stuck anywhere. Use of aluminum, there's a lot of aluminum parts. That's how they get better gas mileage. They weigh less than the old trucks did, but they still got a full-size spare. It's a real working truck. It isn't some joke. As you can see with the orange wiring, that's all high voltage. Now, when you combine the V6 with the hybrid system, the problems that the EcoBoost have in the bigger trucks are they're strained too much if it's just the engine. But when you add the hybrid to it, you put so much less strain on acceleration, these engines generally are going to hold up a lot better than the non-hybrid versions do, especially if you're carrying heavy loads or towing heavy loads. In this case, a hybrid actually makes a lot more sense. Sure, it is complex. As they get old, things can go wrong, but the system's been out for quite some time, that it's not some brand new thing. It's been tried out for quite a while, and they haven't had any particular problems. And as I said, the early engines, yeah, the EcoBoost with no hybrid, yeah, the engines were wearing out faster. I predict that these engines are going to last quite a bit longer than the non-hybrid ones because they have less strain, and that's what you want. When you have a vehicle that you're going to be pulling, towing, you want the least strain possible because you're already straining it by all the weight. So you add more horsepower with hybrid, it only makes sense. Once you're going 60, it really doesn't matter. You're just rolling along, but you got to get up there. You got to pull it up there. And the hybrid system actually is a pretty good idea for that. Take it for a spin. Let's start her up. All electric, so you don't hear the motor. Camera's all over, so we're not going to run into the lions at the end of the driveway. You can see. Pretty good. We're not going to hit anything. I still like looking around myself, but it makes it a lot easier. And you can see the contrast is quite well. It really does the job. Completely smooth, and of course it's a regular F-150 pickup truck. You're high up in the air. You get a good view. And with what Ford's done to the suspensions of these things, they do ride quite well. Although I do have to say the Ford Maverick that I tried out the other day, which has independent rear suspension on it, it actually rode a little bit better because it's got independent suspension on the back. It didn't have a solid rear axle. But this is classic. And most guys with an F-150, they expect a solid rear axle for long life and power delivery. Got that start-stop stuff. Well, all doing that today. Once you get rolling, the engine turns itself on. But it is using a lot of electric power. We took off on pure electric power. And I felt it there. I agree with him. I don't like that second gear wobble. Wait till that guy gets out of the way. Now realize we're starting on electric. So 1, 2, 3, go. It switched pretty fast to the power. Hey, this thing's got some get up and go. There's no arguing that. It'll definitely blow some of this fog away. So you can have power when you need it, and if you're just cruising, you got 36 miles a gallon of this thing just cruising one time, and that's impressive for a full-size pickup truck. It certainly has a lot of modern innovations to it, but it still looks, feels, and pretty much drives like a classic F-150. It's got a V8 engine in it. The modern technology like here, it's showing you that the speed limit's 45, so we'll go a little over. Then you know you're going too fast. Well, I got no problems driving into the fog with this thing. I feel pretty secure. Makes an interesting sound too. And on a smooth road like this, man, you can hear it's pretty quiet. Really smooth. But I have to agree with him on the transmission, because when you take off here, I just felt it. Look, feel that? It's got that little jerky second gear miss there. Let's hope the reprogramming by Ford will fix that, because that is kind of annoying. I gotta say, I was driving like an absolute maniac, and it's still averaging 15.2 over the 5 miles I drove. As comparison, in 2013, I drove a Shelby Cobra GT500 with 667 horsepower, and when I had that, I didn't get 15 miles a gallon. I only got 3. So driving this thing fast, it's kind of impressive. It's like 5 times what I got in that Mustang. So what's my conclusion? Well, if you're not afraid of technology, it's a very interesting truck. With the power that this has, but enough energy to get decent gas mileage, even pulling heavy loads, then you might be thinking about this hybrid version. Especially if you want to use a lot of electrical power and you live where maybe you got a cabin, you want to hook it up for power, or you live in an area where the electric supply is kind of crappy and you want to plug it into your house. Something to think about if you're going to buy a vehicle. If you want to get into electric vehicles, maybe start with a hybrid and see how that works out, rather than go full electric where everything is dependent on electricity. And if it doesn't work out, well, that's the end of that, and that's the end of your money too. Because I can guarantee you for quite some time, Ford is going to sell a lot more F-150s that are powered by internal combustion engines and maybe with hybrid added on than they're going to be selling the Lightnings that are full electric trucks. I don't think America is ready for full electric pickup truck, for their businesses, for going out in the middle of nowhere and then get stuck without electricity. The conventional one with a little hybrid on it, that's probably the better way to go if you're thinking about transitioning into more electrified vehicles than buying a full electric vehicle. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.